My mom didn't even raise her voice. She just stirred her tea, eyes sharp and distant, and said, "You're not getting a single thing from me." My hands froze around the letter, paper trembling, as if it could shatter in my grip. It wasn't about money. It was my inheritance, the only thing my dad had left me, and she had erased it without a second thought. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach knotting in a mix of anger and disbelief. For a long moment, I stared at her, stunned by the calm cruelty in her eyes, realizing I had been invisible to her all my life. Something in me snapped. My name is Lena Carter. I am 28, living in a small, rented apartment above a laundromat in Maplewood, a town that people only passed somewhere else. I have always been quiet. The kind of person my mom said lacked backbone. The kind she preferred to ignore. I work as a graphic designer, mostly sitting in front of my computer all day. Headphones on, listening to music just loud enough to block out the dull of life around me. My mornings start the same way. I wake to the sound of the laundromat downstairs, the clanging of machines vibrating through the thin floorboards. I drag myself out of bed, pour a cup of coffee, and stare out the window at the street below. The town is still asleep, the sidewalks empty except for a stray dog searching for scraps. I eat my breakfast quietly. Cereal in a chipped bowl, milk getting cold because I forget it exists as I scroll through my emails. Work has its deadlines, but it also gives me solitude. And I cling to that. Even when I leave the apartment, the streets feel strangely familiar, almost protective. Maplewood is quiet, small, and forgettable, like me in my mother's eyes. I drive past the same peeling signs, the same cracked pavement, the same houses with overgrown lawns. Sometimes I think it mirrors the life I was allowed to have, ordinary, unnoticed, silent. Then there are moments that remind me how invisible I truly am. Like when I text my brother, Ryan, about dinner at Mom's house, and he replies casually, "Mom's expecting you. Don't be late." Expecting me. The words sting because they are wrapped in a thin layer of politeness, but the truth behind them. I'm supposed to perform, to play my part, to smile at the table while she fawns over him. That evening, I drive to my mom's house. The sun sets behind clouds, casting long shadows across the streets. She opens the door before I even knock. Her smile is polite, practiced, but it doesn't reach her eyes. Ryan is there too, leaning casually against the doorframe. My mom greets him first, her warmth spilling over him, while I'm left standing, waiting, unnoticed. Dinner is always the hardest part. She asks Ryan about his job, praises his achievements, asks for his opinions on trivial matters, and then looks at me, half listening, frowning at my answers. "Is that really all you've done?" She asks casually, as if she has no idea that those words cut deeper than any scream ever could. I force a smile. Try to keep my voice steady, but the tight knot in my chest refuses to loosen. After dinner, I slip out, pretending I'm tired, escaping the cold precision of her attention. Walking home, the wind bites at my face, sharp and biting, like it knows the truth I am carrying inside me. My apartment feels smaller than usual. The walls closing in with every step. I think of the life I've tried to bear, quiet, careful, safe. But the shadows of my mom's favoritism and neglect are long. They stretch into every corner of my existence. Even in the mundane moments, her presence lingers. The way she always compared me to Ryan. The way she smiled at his successes while barely acknowledging mine. The way she made me feel small, invisible, and replaceable. I carry it with me everywhere, a subtle ache that never goes away, and yet, despite it all, I survive. I wake up every day, pour my cold coffee, and face the world with a quiet determination she cannot see. For now I am invisible, yes, but not powerless. And deep down, something tells me that invisibility is about to end. The betrayal didn't happen overnight. It had been a slow, quiet erosion. The kind that only leaves scars after years of small, deliberate cuts. My mom had always had a favorite, and it wasn't me. From the earliest moments I can remember, Ryan received her attention, her praise, her warmth. And I got silence, oversight, and the constant message that I wasn't enough. I remember my 10th birthday clearly. My mom had been distracted, preoccupied with a phone call, but when Ryan walked in holding a small soccer trophy, her entire face lit up. She clapped for him, cheered, and praised him endlessly. Then she looked at me, briefly, a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I blew out my candles alone, feeling the sting of invisibility deep in my chest. I learned then that birthdays weren't about me, they were about who mattered to her. High school didn't get any better. Every honor I earned, every award, was met with polite acknowledgement at best. Meanwhile, Ryan's achievements were celebrated, displayed, and memorialized. He was her golden child and I was just there. I internalized it for years, thinking I must be too quiet, too stubborn, too flawed. I tried harder to win her approval. But nothing worked. After college, I moved out, believing distance might change the dynamic, that maybe she'd see me differently. But the favoritism persisted in subtler ways. She would call Ryan first, send him gifts she forgot to send me, leave me out of family decisions. It was like a slow erasure, a quiet rewriting of my place in the family. I remember finding my father's old papers one rainy afternoon. He had written letters to me. Little notes, encouraging words meant to remind me that I mattered. And in the same drawer were documents she had altered. My inheritance had been quietly redirected to Ryan. She had erased me from even that small claim. As if my existence in her world could be rewritten with ink and indifference. There were other moments that cut just as deeply. Christmas at my parents' house. When I was 20. She handed me a sweater, cheap and ill-fitting, while Ryan unwrapped a laptop he had wanted for months. I stared at it, disbelief and shame warring in my chest. I wanted to feel happy for him, to share in the family joy, but I couldn't. She had replaced me, subtly, carefully, completely. She had created a world where I was optional, a shadow, a placeholder. Even more painful was the way she communicated her favoritism without words. The glance she gave Ryan when he made a joke, the casual brush of her hand on his shoulder, the pride in her tone that she never offered me. I began noticing patterns, how invitations, gifts, attention, and affection were all selectively applied, always with Ryan in mind. I realized that my achievements didn't matter unless they were convenient to her narrative. One day, years later, I confronted her, not about the inheritance, not yet. Just about her treatment. I asked, quietly, almost hesitantly, why she seemed to care more about him than me. She smiled, that practiced smile that felt like a shield. I've always just wanted the best for both of you. Don't be so dramatic. But it wasn't about being dramatic. It was about seeing me, acknowledging me, treating me like I was part of her world. That acknowledgement never came. The slow burn of these betrayals had left me hollow in some ways, but also resilient. I had learned to survive, to hold myself together, even when the world I wanted to belong to didn't recognize me. And yet, each memory lingered like a shadow, reminding me that her favoritism was more than preference, it was a form of erasure, a deliberate rewriting of my story. By the time I moved into my own apartment in Maplewood, the damage had been done. I carried these moments with me, the birthdays ignored, the gifts replaced, the small humiliations, the subtle exclusions. They weren't dramatic scenes that anyone else could notice, but they were heavy, cumulative. Like invisible weights pressing on my chest. I had been sidelined, dismissed and replaced, and it had become the baseline of my life. And yet, despite all of it, I survived. I had built a life that was mine, small and quiet as it was. I had learned to care for myself when she wouldn't. But deep inside, a fire was waiting, quiet, patient, burning, and it was only a matter of time before it ignited. It happened on a gray morning. The kind where the sky seems too heavy to hold itself up. I was sipping coffee at my small kitchen table when the letter arrived. The envelope was crisp, official looking, my mom's precise handwriting across the front. I felt my stomach twist even before opening it. An instinctive warning that whatever waited inside would change nothing and yet everything. I slid the letter out slowly, my fingers trembling. As I read, my chest tightened, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. It wasn't a polite refusal or a subtle suggestion. It was blunt, clinical, and devastating. You are not entitled to anything. All inheritance and family assets have been reassigned. Signed, Mom. The paper felt heavier than it was, as if it carried decades of every small insult. Every ignored birthday, every achievement erased or dismissed. My eyes blurred, my chest pounded with disbelief, anger and something darker. Grief I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, listening to the wind scrape against the windows. And then Ryan called. His voice was casual, almost cheerful. Mom wants us to go through the estate papers together, he said. She thinks it's time we all sort things out. I felt my stomach drop. Together, he said, as if I were a willing participant in a ritual that had always excluded me. I thought of the countless times I had been replaced, erased, overlooked. This wasn't just a letter. This was a performance. A calculated humiliation disguised as a family matter. That evening, I arrived at her house, rain dripping from my coat, the asphalt slick under my feet. She opened the door before I could knock, smiling with the precision of someone delivering a rehearsed line. Ryan was there, leaning casually, chatting as if the tension in the room didn't exist. My mother greeted him first, her warmth radiating toward him while I stood in shadow, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. The meeting itself was worse than I imagined. Paper spread across the dining table, legal documents, forms, everything meticulously organized. She pushed them toward Ryan first, her hand lingering lightly on his shoulder, offering a subtle but unmistakable favor. Then she looked at me, briefly, with the same practiced smile that said nothing. "This is for your own good," she said, almost conversationally. Her voice soft and deliberate. "We're protecting you." I could feel the tight coil of anger in my chest, my pulse hammering in my ears. Her words weren't protection. They were justification for erasure. My inheritance, my rightful claim, my acknowledgement in the world she had controlled, it was gone. And she had the audacity to frame it as care. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers across the table, to demand that she see me. But I didn't. I left instead, the echo of her voice following me down the hallway. Outside, the rain drenched my hair, cold and sharp, pressing against my skin as if urging me to awaken. My heart still pounded from the encounter, but beneath the fear and anger, something hardened. I remembered all the small betrayals, the birthdays ignored, the awards dismissed, the gifts replaced. Each one was a reminder of the pattern under, a pattern that now screamed for acknowledgement. And I realized, sitting in the empty glow of the streetlights, that this wasn't just about money or legal papers. This was about reclaiming my life, my place, my dignity. I walked the wet streets of Maplewood that night, each step echoing in the silence. Sleep was impossible. My mind replayed every moment, every insult, every subtle act of erasure my mom had carried out over decades. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my fists clenching and unclenching automatically. By the time I returned to my apartment, my body was exhausted, but my mind was clear. I had been pushed too far, ignored for too long, humiliated one time too many. This was the turning point. I wouldn't beg anymore. I wouldn't hide or shrink. Something inside me had awakened, a quiet, patient fire that was ready to burn through every lie and injustice she had built around me. And in that moment, I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I was going to make her see me, not as the shadow she had created, but as the person I had always been, strong, visible, and undeniable. The nights that followed were long, restless, and almost unbearable. Sleep had become a stranger, a fleeting shadow that dissolved before I could hold on to it. I would lie in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster as my mind replayed every humiliation, every subtle erasure my mother had orchestrated throughout my life. My hands twitched, my chest ached, and a quiet fury simmered beneath the exhaustion. I remembered the small moments first. The 10th birthday she ignored, the award ceremonies where her smile never reached me, the Christmas morning where Ryan's gift was celebrated and mine was forgotten. Each memory felt like a weight pressing into my ribs, making it hard to breathe. And yet, beneath the weight, a strange energy began to stir. It was quiet at first, a flicker of recognition, a whisper of defiance, but it grew steadily, feeding on years of neglect, disappointment, and invisibility. I would pace my apartment, the wooden floors creaking under my feet. I ran my fingers over old photographs, letters, and keepsakes my father had left behind, things she had tried to make me forget. I closed my eyes and could almost hear his voice, telling me I mattered, that I had a place in this world, that her favoritism didn't define my worth. The contrast between her cold indifference and his quiet love made my blood boil. And yet it also sharpened my resolve. I thought about Ryan, how easy it had been for him to step into her favor, how effortless it seemed to win her attention. And I thought about myself, the quiet one, the overlooked one, the shadow she had tried to erase. I felt a surge of anger that was almost physical, a twisting in my stomach, a heat in my chest, a tension in my jaw. Every step I took across my apartment felt like a drumbeat, each one reinforcing a silent promise. I would no longer be invisible. I remembered the letter, the family meeting, the way she had smiled at Ryan while passing over me. I felt the old ache, the sting of humiliation, and the weight of years pressing down on me. But instead of breaking me, it ignited something deeper, a fire that refused to be extinguished. I realized that I couldn't wait for her recognition, couldn't rely on her approval, and couldn't hide any longer. My dignity, my life, my identity, these were mine to reclaim. I spent hours pacing, thinking, plotting, replaying memories in painful detail. Each insult, each act of replacement, each subtle manipulation was catalogued in my mind. I traced the trajectory of her favoritism, the patterns of her emotional cruelty, and the way she had quietly rewritten the narrative of my life. Every detail sharpened my focus, fed my determination, and hardened the decision I had made. By the time dawn began to lighten the sky, my body was exhausted, my mind raw, but my resolve was unshakable. I could feel the tension in my muscles, the tight coil in my chest, and the restless energy that would not be ignored. I sat down at my kitchen table, hands clasped around a mug of cold coffee, and let the reality settle in. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I would no longer allow her to dictate my worth, to erase my accomplishments, or to manipulate my sense of belonging. The fire inside me had grown from a whisper into a roar, quiet but undeniable, patient but unstoppable. It pulsed through my veins like electricity, a promise to myself that I would claim what was rightfully mine. Not through anger or malice, but through truth, persistence, and unwavering focus. And in that moment, as the first rays of sunlight pierced my apartment window, I made a silent vow. I wasn't just going to survive her indifference anymore. I was going to make sure she could no longer ignore me, no longer erase me, no longer control the narrative of my life. The quiet fire that had smoldered for years was now a steady flame, guiding me toward a reckoning I could no longer avoid. Something had shifted that night. I felt it in every ache, every heartbeat, every shiver of resolve coursing through me. I wasn't the quiet, overlooked child anymore. I was someone who had been forged in neglect and betrayal, hardened by years of invisibility, and ready to step into a truth that she could not deny. And so, with the morning light washing over me, I finally understood the time for waiting, for pleading, was over. I was done. I wasn't going to beg anymore. The first step was gathering proof. Every email, every document, every old note my father had written, every tiny piece of evidence she had tried to erase. I collected them methodically, carefully, like a soldier preparing for battle. I went through old drawers, attics, and filing cabinets, finding letters that confirmed what I had always suspected. She had quietly written my inheritance, redirected funds, and ensured that Ryan would always be the favored child. I made a list of witnesses, distant relatives, neighbors, even family friends who had seen her subtle favoritism over the years. I emailed them one by one, carefully explaining what I needed, being honest but discreet. Some responded with vague memories, hesitant statements that seemed almost too cautious, and I had to coax out every detail, piecing together decades of quiet injustice. I also consulted a lawyer, not to fight, but to understand what was legally possible. The first attempt felt promising, but quickly fell apart. My lawyer, after reviewing the old documents, told me the claim was too small to pursue, and that the courts would likely dismiss it as trivial. I remember sitting in the dim office, the city lights reflecting on the glass, and feeling a familiar ache in my chest, the one that came from being overlooked and dismissed. For a moment, I considered giving up, but I didn't. Giving up had been my mother's goal all along. There were other setbacks. A cousin I had relied on misremembered a key detail, almost giving me false hope. A witness grew hesitant, unsure if they wanted to be involved. I felt the old patterns of invisibility and betrayal creep back, whispering doubts into my mind. Every failure felt like a reminder of the years I had spent being overlooked, erased, replaced. But with each setback, I adapted. I traced old emails, cross-referenced dates, and pulled out receipts, letters and notes that no one could deny. I documented everything meticulously, creating a timeline that left no room for doubt. Every small piece of paper, every time-stamped message, every witness account was another brick in the foundation of the truth I was building. I spent nights at my apartment, spreading papers across the floor, pacing between stacks of evidence, my mind racing with strategy. I imagined the confrontation, rehearsed my words, anticipated her excuses, her lies, her practiced calm. I visualized every possible response, every emotional reaction, preparing for her deny, deflect, or manipulate. And yet, despite all this preparation, I hit dead ends. Some documents were missing, some witnesses were unreliable, and the weight of decades of erasure threatened to overwhelm me. I remember one evening, sitting on the edge of my bed, exhausted, feeling the familiar sting of invisibility creeping back. I thought about giving up, about letting her have the last word, letting her win by default. But I didn't. Because this time I wasn't just fighting for inheritance. I was fighting for myself, for recognition, for dignity, for the years she had tried to erase. Each setback, each obstacle, each near failure only sharpened my determination. I realized that truth, patience, and persistence were the weapons she could not anticipate, could not manipulate. And so I rebuilt. I double-checked every document, re-interviewed every witness, cross-referenced every detail. Each failure became a lesson, each obstacle a stepping stone. Slowly, methodically, I assembled a case that could not be ignored, a truth she could not erase. By the time I finished, the room was cluttered with papers. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and ink, and I felt a strange calm. The fire that had burned quietly inside me for years had grown into a steady, controlled flame. I was ready. But I knew one thing for certain: the hardest part was still ahead. She had built her life around controlling the narrative, and now, for the first time, that narrative was about to be challenged. Something told me this would not be easy. She would try to fight, to manipulate, to twist facts to her favor. But I had patience, evidence and truth on my side. And for the first time in my life, I believed that she could no longer erase me. The day finally arrived. I walked into my mother's house carrying a thick folder of documents, letters, emails, and witness statements. Every step felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the weight of years finally converging into this single, undeniable moment. I could hear the faint hum of the heater, the ticking of the old wall clock, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. She greeted me with her usual practiced smile, but something was different. Perhaps she sensed that this wasn't a casual family matter. Ryan was there too, fidgeting nervously, sensing the tension that I had been carrying alone for years. I placed the folder on the dining table, spreading its contents carefully. Every letter, note, every altered document was laid bare. I spoke clearly, deliberately. These are the records of your decisions: how you changed my inheritance, how you favored Ryan, how you erased me from the family you claimed to love. Her eyes flickered across the papers, her expression tight, composed, but there was a tremor in her hand as she reached for her teacup. I could feel the truth striking her before she could speak, before she could craft excuses or defections. The family watched in stunned silence. Ryan looked from me to her, confusion and guilt painting his face. He tried to speak, to defend her, but no words could bridge the weight of evidence laid out so clearly. Each paper was a mirror reflecting her decades of manipulation, her subtle cruelties, and the deliberate erasure she had carried out. I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over me. For so long I had been invisible, overlooked, replaced, but now, finally, I was being seen. Not through her acknowledgement, not through her approval, but through the undeniable truth she could no longer deny. She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She simply sat, small and still, the color draining from her face. No words could undo the years of pain she had caused, and for the first time, she understood the weight of her choices. Her hands trembled slightly, not from anger, but from shame, a quiet, crushing shame that she could not escape. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, realizing the world he had always known was built on her favoritism and manipulation. His guilt was quiet, muted, but it was there. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth itself was my vindication. I watched my mother's face, searching for any sign of denial, any attempt to justify herself. But there was none. The control she had wielded for decades had slipped through her fingers like sand. The household that had been her stage, her theater of influence, was now silent, the audience staring in shock. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with restoration. I had been erased, dismissed, and replaced for years, but now, finally, my place was undeniable. I had reclaimed the story of my life. Her collapse was not dramatic. No shouting, no confrontation, only a small, silent crumpling of her composure, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her like a physical force. For the first time, I saw her not as the untouchable figure of authority, but as a flawed human, confronted with the undeniable consequences of her choices. And as I stood there, folder in hand, I realized something profound. The real victory wasn't humiliation, wasn't exposure. wasn't forcing her to feel shame. The real victory was reclaiming myself, my identity, my life. She could no longer erase me. I could finally exist on my own terms without fear, without apology, without invisibility. The room remained quiet, the tension thick, yet peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt seen, acknowledged, not through her love, not through her approval, but through truth. And that was enough. Days passed in a quiet blur after the confrontation. I didn't hear from my mother, and that silence, strange as it felt, was a relief. I spent mornings sitting on my balcony, the sun casting golden light across Maplewood's quiet streets. The hum of the town, the distant washing machines, the occasional car, the birds perched on the telephone wires, felt almost comforting. I breathed in deeply, letting the cool morning air fill my lungs, letting it remind me that I had survived everything she had tried to take from me. I thought about the confrontation again. How carefully I had laid out the evidence, the truth I had gathered over months. I had expected anger, shouting, maybe tears. But none of that came. Instead, there was silence, a quiet collapse of her control and authority, a momentary stillness in which the truth finally spoke, louder than her manipulations ever could. I had expected to feel satisfaction, a rush of triumph, but instead I felt something different: peace. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A sense that the burden I had carried for decades, the weight of invisibility and replacement, had finally lifted. I could sit with myself without the constant ache of being unseen, without replaying every insult, every small betrayal. I could just exist. I looked back on my life, on the years I had spent fighting for acknowledgement, on the moments I had been overlooked, erased, replaced. And I realized that my real victory wasn't the inheritance, wasn't the proof, wasn't even the exposure. It was reclaiming my own sense of self, my identity outside of her approval. I was no longer the quiet, invisible child she had tried to create. I was Lena Carter, 28, whole and unafraid. Even Ryan seemed changed. He didn't speak much, avoided her gaze. And I sensed a new awareness in him. A recognition that the world his mother had constructed wasn't reality. That favoritism and manipulation could not erase the truth. I didn't need to teach him that. Life had already done it for him. I spent evenings alone, quietly organizing my apartment, my life, my thoughts. I didn't reach out to my mother, and she didn't contact me. I realized I didn't need her acknowledgement anymore. The peace I sought wasn't in her approval, but in the reclamation of my dignity, the control of my own narrative, the quiet assertion of my existence. Sometimes I still think about her, about the years lost to subtle cruelty, about the moments that shaped me into someone stronger, sharper, and wiser than I might have been. But those thoughts are no longer heavy. They are reminders of what I survived, of the person I have become, and of the quiet fire that guided me through years of invisibility to this moment of calm. I walk through Maplewood now with a sense of purpose, my footsteps echoing softly on the cracked sidewalks, a small smile playing on my lips. I carry my life with me, intact and undeniable. No longer bound by her manipulation, no longer waiting for approval, no longer shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. I have my place in the world, and it is mine alone. And at night, when the town is quiet and the wind presses against my windows, I feel it clearly: the battles fought, the truths uncovered, the careful strategies executed. They were never about her, really. They were about me, my life, and the reclamation of a dignity that no one could take away. Something has shifted inside me, permanently. The fire that once burned quietly now rests as a steady warmth, a guide, a reminder that I am no longer invisible. That peace is finally mine. Sitting here now, weeks after everything unfolded, I realize that the story of my life isn't about what my mother took from me. It's about what I refused to let her erase. I have learned that revenge isn't about making someone suffer or proving a point. It's about reclaiming what is yours: your dignity, your identity, your place in the world. That is a quiet, lasting victory, far stronger than any anger or resentment could ever be. I have understood something essential: distance is powerful. Sometimes the person who caused you the most pain does not need confrontation to lose their hold over you. By stepping back, by building my life with patience, evidence, and truth, I removed her power over me. She can no longer define me, control me, or rewrite the story of my life. And that freedom, that quiet independence, is more rewarding than any inheritance could have been. I also learned that survival is not about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about walking through the world with your head held high, unafraid of judgment by favoritism or cruelty, and unbound by someone else's attempts to diminish you. I am no longer the quiet, overlooked child. I am Lena Carter, alive, resilient, and whole. And yet, I feel no bitterness. I don't dwell on her failures, her manipulations, or the years of neglect. I acknowledge them, yes, but I carry them lightly now, as reminders of how far I've come, not as weights holding me back. The fire that once burned with anger now burns steadily as a source of guidance. A reminder of my strength, my patience, and my resilience. If there is one truth I want to hold on to forever, it is this: life is not about making others pay. Life is about surviving, reclaiming your dignity, and living fully on your own terms. No one can take that from you unless you allow them to. I didn't, and in the quiet moments, when the world slows and the streets of Maplewood are empty, I smile softly to myself. I am no longer invisible. I am seen, I am whole, I am free.